President Trump today echoed calls for Americans to hunker down and avoid unnecessary travel.
Well, my administration is recommending that all Americans, including the young and healthy, work to engage in schooling from home when possible, avoid gathering in groups of more than 10 people, avoid discretionary travel, and avoid eating and drinking at bars, restaurants, and public food courts.
While this is a prudent public health move, what's the cost to the economy? Joining us now, I'm delighted he is with us, Steve Forbes, chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media, and John Catsimatidis, who's the owner of Gristedes. Am I saying that right, supermarket chain? I hope I'm saying that right.
Well,
Steve, how much economic damage could a nationwide lockdown do, even just 2 weeks, to the U.S. economy?
Laura, the damage is going to be substantial, and it's going to hurt a lot of individuals, and it's going to put out of business tens of thousands of businesses unless something is done. Not just small businesses, but big ones as well, starting with the airlines. That's why it's essential for the Federal Reserve to do now what it did 12 years ago and provide loans through commercial paper. They can set up a facility to provide money, cash, to otherwise solvent businesses to keep them through this storm. On the individual side, President Trump has to push for a suspension of the payroll tax. That'll put $2,000 or more in people's pockets between now and year end. And also something like what Senator Cotton is proposing for middle and low income people to get a one-time check. The nice thing about these measures, Laura, is they end when the crisis ends, instead of this sick paid leave and things like that, which will crush small business in the future. Do these one-time emergency measures. They're expensive, but the stock market's already lost $6 trillion in value. Do these one-time things, and we'll get through the storm and be prepared for a recovery later this year.
Yeah, Steve, I did my angle earlier on the just how this can't become the new normal every time a health crisis occurs in another country and then just wreck our economy. That can't be the new normal. We have to take lessons from this going forward about how we deal with China, how we deal with supply chains, how we deal with testing at airports. I mean, you can't shut down the economy again in the fall if this virus pops back up.
No, and one of the things that should be done along those lines, in addition, especially on the drug side, and there are technologies now where we can vastly improve the manufacturing of drugs, is in terms of China and those things should be done. But also, I think in terms of the future, we need a commission like we did after Pearl Harbor, like we did after 9/11. Why did the CDC really botch this thing up? We weren't prepared with tests. They knew back in November and December a bad thing was coming our way, and they didn't. They responded like a bureaucracy, more interested in bureaucratic rules rather than mobilizing the private sector. You contrast that with South Korea, which has already done each day more tests than we've done since December. And that's an outrage, and that we've got to avoid that again. So we nipped these things in the bud. We had experience with Ebola, with swine flu, and other epidemics, potential epidemics. Why did they fail this time? We need to find out to prevent that from happening again.
Yeah, and decouple from China when it comes to essential products, medicines, and medical supplies. We cannot be held hostage by other countries.
That'll happen soon.
Yeah, well, John, I want to talk to you about the food supply. We've had an enormous amount of panic on the part of Americans in wanting to make sure they have enough food for their families. What can you tell us tonight about that concern of American families and how they should be reacting?
Well, I think that there's a shortage of toilet paper, of course. It's always a shortage of toilet paper. And there's a shortage of certain Clorox products and products that are for cleaning. But people are panicking, and it's not about the Fed. I don't think the Fed can solve this problem. It's about giving people hope that there's a solution out there. I mean, the Fed has cut rates to nothing, did not help. The Fed has said they're going to provide $700 billion. It didn't help. This is about providing hope to the people. And I think President Trump has done everything right so far. He has closed the borders, which is the right thing to do. And I think Trump is tough enough that if one of the companies has a virus vaccine or very close to it, I think he's going to force it and make it happen and, you know, have some blue sky out there.
Yeah, I mean, everyone wanted Trump to be, you know, as forthright and somber as he was today. And as he was, Steve, you saw the market go down even further when he was speaking, because he said it could be July or August. And he didn't mean we were going to be in our houses to July or August, but he meant the virus could still be circulating.
Well, I think the key thing now is to have the Fed, one, make sure these solvent businesses don't go under, and do what the president's recommended in terms of a payroll tax so that people get immediate relief, and also reduces the cost of businesses to keep people working. And so that's win-win. And so the president, I think, should be emphasizing those things as well as not painting a too rosy a picture. I think we'll recover from this sooner, as soon as we get those tests out there and get a real knowledge of what the facts are, so we can respond appropriately and laser-like instead of shooting in the dark because we just don't know.
Yeah, we need more information, more facts, and that will determine the future course. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Great to see you both.